Hi everyone, welcome to the next episode of the Athletic Skills Podcast, and today I am delighted to have Ryan Blake on. Mr. Ryan, thank you very much for joining.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
So Ryan is a performance coach in sort of a different area that we haven't really spoke around before. So today we're going to chat around leadership and why leadership is important in a sporting context. But Ryan, I know you've got lots of different other interests, and you mentioned, I know you're interested in extreme sports. I know you've worked in team sports and S&C coach as well, so you've got lots of different experiences. So can you just explain to us first why you kind of feel, or why you sort of interested in the leadership side, and what made you come to this in terms of your experiences, and then we can dive into sort of around the leadership for coaches to learn about.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, thanks again for having me on. It's a pleasure to be on the show. I listen to it a lot. So over my career, I've had a lot of different experience. I've had experience as a PT. I've had experience as a sport product marketing representative, head of sports science for an international high performance academy, lead strength and conditioning coach in pro team sport, strength and conditioning consultant in a pro individual sport, head of sports science for like a private senior school, and most recently a founder and director of a sports performance company and a founder and director of like a performance coaching company. The biggest differences between the two are the performance coaching company helps sports industry executives and directors become better leaders, ultimately through improved mindset, well-being and lifestyle solutions. And the other sports performance consultancy is ultimately helps action and endurance sports athletes become better competitors, largely through like enhanced performance protection and opportunity systems. So I appreciate there's a lot of word salad there, but it's the most succinct definition that I can give at the moment.
Before we go a little bit further into leadership, can you just explain in a broad context why leadership is important in a sporting context? Just go into kind of why that's an important trait to have.
Yeah, sure thing. So it's a really good question, and my answer on this changes a lot. But ultimately, if we're asking what we mean by leadership in a sports performance context, or kind of any performance context, to be honest, it's about the ability to create positive change and influence outcomes within your specific role and expertise. So it's more about being proactive rather than reactive, taking ownership of problems before they escalate, and consistently trying to add value beyond your job description. So if I was going to summarize it, it would mean understanding how your work connects to the bigger picture and communicating that effectively to whoever's in your environment. So that could be athletes, it could be coaches, it could be other staff members in a sports performance context, or it could be people in a management position in a more of a general sports industry context.
And can anyone be a leader in a sporting context? Obviously, you've got the head coach, you've got the sporting director, but can any practitioner be a leader in that in their environment?
Again, it's a really good question, and for me, it comes down to yes, anyone can be a leader, but I think the first thing you need to ask yourself first is the time right for that to happen? So if we kind of explore maybe how anyone like an S&C coach or performance staff in a sports context can discover their leadership identity. Identity really is the key word for me. So you have to look at your natural strengths and how they translate into like a performance impact. Are you the data-driven problem solver, the relationship builder, or something like the systematic optimizer? And then look at the gaps in your environment. So what is missing? What leadership style is missing? So your unique identity will ultimately sit at the intersection of your strengths and your organization's needs. So if you reflect on the moments when you've kind of felt most effective and confident, that's usually a good place to start. And that's where your authentic leadership style will live. And usually from personal experience, it's taken a long time to find that. And I was trying to search for it earlier for the wrong reasons. And I only found that because everything else kind of fell into place and I needed to step up. And then therefore it kind of was a beautiful accident, if that makes sense. So it will become more obvious if everything else is in order, and it will be less obvious if it's not.
So as you mentioned that you kind of developed your authenticity and through experience? So is that how people or leaders are sort of found in terms of the coaching sort of context? So through experiences, through what's working for different people, because there's not one specific mold that fits everyone. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It's quite a tricky question to answer. I mean, for me, it's all about knowledge when it comes to leadership, and there's kind of 5 things really that you need to ask yourself. So, or you need to remember really. So you have to know what you know, but more importantly, you have to know what you don't know. And if you don't know, then find someone who does. A mistake I've made is just to never make someone the victim of limitations, which is very easy to do when you're under pressure, and just ensure that any learning that needs to take place will enable you to support the person or people that you're trying to help. So I'm not sure if I've really answered your question there, Isaac, but hopefully
Yeah,
it's alluded to something useful.
yeah, I put you on your toes there in terms of a question out of the blue. But so you mentioned a few different traits there in terms of what a leader looks like in terms of, but is there any common traits or aspects of a performance coach or an S&C coach that can really make them a good leader in a performance or sporting background?
Yeah, so ultimately, I mean, traits is a huge part of leadership, and you could do a whole separate podcast episode on this. But there's kind of 4 main elements to it for me. There's people, there's culture, and there's learning, and then there's the performance. Specifically about traits that allow S&C or performance staff to lead from within a multidisciplinary team. Then the key ones are like systems thinking. So understanding how your work impacts every other department. There's like collaborative competence. So like the ability to translate your expertise into a language that others understand, especially if you're working with international athletes or international coaches. And then there's like solution ownership. So like stepping up with answers, not just problems. Then developing these regularly, really, by sitting in on other departments' meetings, for example, like asking your coaches and athletes like how your work affects them, and always kind of coming to discussions with like proposed solutions. Start viewing yourself more as a performance partner, not necessarily just a service provider.
So you mentioned those traits there that will identify a good leader and that kind of 4-step model that you mentioned. But what happens when a support coach might try to force leadership or maybe, try and be a leader too soon and actually might not actually be there at that time? So what happens in that sort of scenario?
This is a great question, and this happens, as you know, like this happens so much in sport, particularly in pro sport. So it could either come from the coaches or it could come from the athletes. So this can apply to both. What happens is they create resistance, and then therefore they lose credibility. So I've seen talented professionals like damage relationships by pushing ideas like before establishing trust, or like trying to influence decisions outside of their expertise area, largely just because of their personality type, or possibly because they're underperforming and they feel that they need to convey some form of positivity to cover that up. But forced leadership will often come from insecurity, and it kind of creates defensive responses from quite a lot of people around you. But like true leadership will like emerge naturally when you're consistently delivering value. But the key thing, and this can apply to any area of high performance, whether it's corporate or sport, is building relationships first. That really is the most important thing.
Yeah, and I can think of my own scenario being quite a young lead S&C coach in a sporting background, and those when you come into an environment with um, athletes as well, those relationships are key to try and work with different individuals, like you mentioned, coaches and athletes, and there's a lot of different stakeholders to work with. So what sort of things can a coach start to earn respect of those different people, whether that's in an academy setting or from a senior level or from the directors above? So how can that person start to earn respect and be a leader?
I think there's 3 main things really that are the most important, and these aren't necessarily in a particular order. So consistency is the first one. So consistency in your standards and your communication. So whether it's executives at the top of an organisation or entry level academy players, they deserve respect and relatability, and that's important that that's consistent. The next one's kind of adaptability, which is crucial. Like nothing ever stays the same in a chaotic world of sport. So adaptability in your approach. So speaking, if you take that example I just gave, like speaking very differently to a C-suite executive versus a 16-year-old academy athlete, but whilst maintaining kind of the same core message. So that's quite important. And this last one might be obvious because you potentially wouldn't be there if you didn't have this, but it's competence. So that making it competence that's obvious, but importantly not arrogant, which a lot of people get wrong. I got that wrong when I was younger. And like letting your work speak first rather than your words. And these ultimately, all those three things, consistency, adaptability, competence, they all underpin an umbrella term really for care that extends beyond your immediate role. Like showing genuine interest in the organisation's success, but at every level is important. So
So when you're working day to day in a sporting background, so how do you start to align your day-to-day behaviors with your values, and how do you start to build influence within the environment that you're within?
another great question. So define exactly what your core values are in performance terms first. So not just in like integrity, but what integrity looks like when designing a training program or reporting athlete data, etc. And then kind of creating like what I would refer to as like behavioral anchors. So like specific actions which would demonstrate these values daily. So for example, like if you value excellence, that might mean like always having backup plans for sessions or following up on like athlete concerns, like as soon as possible, not within at least 24 hours. Because otherwise they could just ripple. And then just consistency really between like your stated values and like visible actions will build trust. And this is what I alluded to earlier, and that trust is ultimately then becomes the foundation of the influence you can have in that environment.
So many support staff are not necessarily in positional sense the leader in the environment. So how can those people in the performance sort of staff or S&C coaches or sports science start to influence above in certain decisions or sort of actions going forward? How can they maybe start to influence maybe that's directors or the head coach?
So I think the success of this largely depends on like who is already in that environment, because if you're in a great environment or if you're in like a high performance environment, then you probably shouldn't have to consider having to do this. It should just be the same as having a normal conversation. I've been in environments which were high performance and you had to do this because they weren't what they kind of claimed to be. Framing everything through the lens of the performance outcomes you want to achieve and the organisational goals ultimately is the best way to do it. So instead of, I think we should change this, try something like, I've noticed this pattern might be limiting our performance gains. And then here's some data to show that, and here's a solution. And it's the same question, but it's delivered in more of a factual statement. So people tend to listen to that more. And then always make it about the mission, not your opinion, is another way of approaching it. So ask permission to contribute rather than kind of demanding attention, and acknowledge the expertise and experience of all your colleagues whilst adding your perspective as well.
And you've mentioned what good communication looks like for those people above you, but what about what mistakes people should maybe avoid? You mentioned there around asking for permission, but what about for like, yeah, so people can jump in too soon or people can maybe just demand too soon or whatever. So yeah, what common mistakes do sort of those performance staff make when trying to influence above?
I've personally made more mistakes than I have not. So making mistakes is okay as long as you learn from them. So I think that's the first thing to realise that nobody's perfect. But yeah, ultimately, like never bring your problems without solutions. That's the biggest takeaway, especially during periods of high pressure. Like, with key parts of the season, at the end of the season when everyone's exhausted. Avoid challenging decisions publicly as well. So like save disagreements for private conversations and one-on-one. It doesn't affect anyone else or everyone else. Don't offer input outside your area of expertise without acknowledging those boundaries, and resist the urge to prove your value by over communicating during crisis moments, when ultimately people need space to execute, not analyze.
So you mentioned some good tips there for coaches, but so what's the one thing that a coach should maybe stop doing when they're maybe trying to force being a leader if they want to try and grow in their sort of environment? So is there anything that commonalities that a coach maybe should try and stop doing in their sort of practice?
So the reason why that question's kind of made me laugh is because I think we can all kind of close our eyes and think of that one coach who tries to be the smartest person in every conversation, and you ultimately need to stop that. Great leaders ask more questions than they answer, and they kind of create space for others to contribute. So when you're constantly need to demonstrate your knowledge, like you're shutting down collaboration, and you're missing opportunities really to learn from people around you and your team. Leadership is about elevating others' performance really, rather than, or not necessarily, just showcasing your own experience.
And is there one maybe underrated sort of behavior that people may not be thinking of first in their mind that really builds that long-term respect when you're working with whether coaches or athletes or directors above? So yeah, something that maybe not might come to mind for a coach that actually helps them being a good leader.
Yeah, this is a great question. It kind of comes back to that what I alluded to earlier about care, and it's about following up really without being asked. So, for instance, like when you tell an athlete like you'll look into something, like, or you'll tell a coach that you're trying to investigate something, like actually do it and like report back as soon as you can. Even if the answer is like I couldn't find a solution yet, but like this is what I'm trying next. This is really powerful because it builds trust. It shows that you're taking ownership of outcomes, not just tasks. And it's a small behavior really that separates you from being average. And it just lets your professionalism shine through.
And I'm sure you can think it in your scenario, and I can think within my scenario as a young practitioner. But what maybe should an S&C coach or a practitioner, when they're maybe being overlooked in decisions or within their environment, that can maybe start to be a leader, start to have some sort of influence or be involved? Because yeah, I'm sure you've had it before when you're maybe getting overlooked in decision making.
Again, another great question. I think the key thing is that I've learned is, and this is what I try to kind of instill with a lot of people I work with now, but particularly sports industry execs and sports industry directors, is like leadership isn't a promotion that you wait for. It's like a mindset you choose. So if you start leading within your current role by kind of taking ownership of outcomes, not just activities, is probably the first thing I'd say. And then kind of focusing on becoming indispensable through consistent value delivery, rather than demanding recognition, which I've kind of alluded to earlier. I've worked with some brilliant leaders. I've also worked with some terrible leaders. Some head coaches and sports directors that I've worked with, you wouldn't believe some of the things they've done that I've kind of in a professional environment. It kind of beggars belief. But the best leaders I know, they don't wait for permission to make an impact. They kind of quietly become the person that everyone turns to for solutions. And ultimately, like, your expertise is your platform. So if you use it to kind of serve others' success, like, your leadership will follow naturally.
So I know you've been doing a lot of work, and I've seen a lot of work from you in terms of maybe different frameworks that you've got out there in terms of around leadership and the stuff you mentioned on this call. But so is there anywhere that maybe coaches or practitioners that wants to start to learn a little more around this area can have a look at more of your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm consistently posting daily on LinkedIn about all this stuff. It's, the ultimate thing I'm trying to help people do here is like any kind of sports industry executive or directors, and I'm actually working with a lot of coaches at the moment as well, is to minimize the stress they have in their life and trying to maximize their fulfillment. Because ultimately, if you can live better, you can lead better. And a lot of people in these kind of high pressure, high performance roles, I've been guilty of it. I'm sure lots of people listening could probably relate to this, is like, you do have to sacrifice things when you're under pressure. And usually the first thing to go is your well-being or your lifestyle. And the the main thing that can control that is your mindset. The kind of three key areas I've tried to help people work on here are like moving from overloaded and stressed to being free and relaxed, to move from being unhealthy and destructive to kind of happy and content, and move from being burnt out and kind of constantly tired to kind of being more energized and ultimately alive. Because if you're ultimately not your best self, you can't be the best leader that people need. And you have to invest time and energy into making you the best version of yourself so you can be the best leader, the best version of the leader you want to be. And as I alluded to earlier, I have this kind of model and framework I work with, and it's ultimately about improving mindset, well-being and lifestyle to help you get there, and focusing on the kind of core goal of lowering the amount of stress you have so you can increase the amount of fulfillment that's possible. And there's lots of information about how I do this on various social media platforms and on my website, but there's always something every day on LinkedIn that people can take away and apply instantly.
And I'll put those in the show notes to people that want to have looks at. Yeah, like you say, you do post multiple things or quite a few every day, so there's quite a lot to take in there for people in terms of easy actions to maybe start to change their mindset and start to think a little bit more around leadership. So thank you for posting and sharing a lot of your ideas. And it's something that a little bit different that people may or coaches might not have thought about that they can actually start to change in their practice. So Ryan, thank you very much for joining, and it's been great to chat to you as well.
It's a pleasure, and thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Ryan. Have a good rest of your day.